Good evening, everybody, and welcome to The Late Show with me, Tom Rogers, on Teachers Talk Radio. And we are also streaming our show live across LinkedIn, YouTube, and Twitter through our Teachers Talk Radio account. And thanks for everybody for tuning in to Teachers Talk Radio. We're coming up to our 1 year anniversary. I can't believe it. 1 year of Teachers Talk Radio shows. That's a lot of shows. I think we've nearly done 1,000 Teachers Talk Radio shows over the last year. Huge volume of amazing shows that people have been tuning into. Already got a few people joining the live show on the Podbean app. And for a first time ever, we are also streaming this show through multiple platforms. You could be watching this on Twitter at TT Radio 2022. You could be watching this show on YouTube at Teachers Talk Radio. You could be watching this show on LinkedIn through our LinkedIn channel, where we've got about 700 followers over on LinkedIn. So you could be watching it or listening to it practically anywhere. Good evening to Noam, who has just joined, one of our regular listeners from Iran. Good evening, Noam. It is good to see you with us. Miss Sorsha, good to see you. And also, just to kind of talk a little bit about what we're talking about on the show today. The focus of the show is on knife crime prevention and the things that are going on with knife crime around the UK. And it's obviously been a terrible year or two in terms of what's actually happened with knife crime around this country. So just last year, 30 teenagers, died in the capital in London just last year. And 3 days ago, there was actually an article published on the BBC website about this. And the new underage record was set last year for stabbing homicides in the city of London. A third of all England's stabbing deaths were reported in the city of London. But it doesn't just stop there. There are instances of children and teenagers being affected by this all around the country. And just a couple of months ago, it may have been 6 weeks ago now, a 13-year-old girl was stabbed to death in my city, Liverpool. And that had a profound effect on the community in Liverpool in terms of people's awareness of what was going on with knife crime and how it was actually affecting communities. So thank you very much for tuning into this. And I've got two special guests with me. I'm going to introduce the first one of those guests, hopefully, in just a second. And both guests are coming on to talk about the impact of knife crime on them. The first guest, who is Carl Scott, is going to be talking about it very much from a personal perspective. And the second guest, who is Tom Jewkes, will be talking about it from a charity perspective, as he represents the Ben Kinsella Foundation. So he will be talking to us about how they are trying to tackle knife crime through education. It's not an easy thing to try and overcome, I guess. It's a very difficult topic. It's even a difficult topic for us to discuss tonight. Just going to hopefully tune us into our guest. Carl, good evening to you. Hello, how are you? Are you good? Good. I can hear you loud and clear. You are live on Teachers Talk Radio, and we are absolutely delighted to have you with us. When I reached out to Carl about coming on to TTR, it was very much from the perspective of somebody who has first-hand experience of knife crime. I actually reached out before this show over on Facebook, and Carl was somebody who got in touch, and his story really intrigued me in terms of what he's been through and what he's doing now. So, Carl, I'm going to hand over to you now with a little introduction. If you want to introduce yourself and just tell everybody where you're from, what you do, and maybe a little bit of backstory about yourself.
Okay, so yeah, I'm Carl Scott. Currently, I live in East Sussex, but I'm originated from Nottingham originally. But for my living that I do currently at the moment is I do alcohol support work for vulnerable adults that are suffering with addiction in the community. But within my free time, I go around schools and I do talks with a whole bunch of kids in colleges, secondary schools, around the risks and dangers of property line, knife crime, grooming, exploitation, and just basically put the awareness out there for kids to try and help them make better choices and find the risks that come with leading that lifestyle. So because my previous lifestyle was that, so growing up on the streets of Nottingham, my life revolved around gang lifestyle, drug dealing, knife crime. It was great. It was quite hard growing up.
Do you want to take us back to the beginning, if you like? And you mentioned that you fell into this at quite an early age. Can you kind of tell us how you ended up falling into it? What happened? Why did you go down this path?
So basically, growing up for me, I mean, you can never, like, in a song that I put on YouTube, you can't really blame the fact of not having a father around, because there is some good mums out there that are trying the best for their kids. But I was brought up without my dad. I didn't even know my dad well. I had a stepdad, but I kind of rebelled against that. So what happened were, with the friends that I'd grew up with on the streets, we kind of like gelled together really and just made it as like a lot of people would call it a gang, but us personally wouldn't call it that. We'd just call it a bunch of friends just going out, and back then, admittedly, causing chaos in the community and basically doing as we pleased, really, if you want to put it bluntly. And that's kind of how it all started. And then, then you have a different problem with this person or someone from that estate, you've got a problem with them. And then that's how it kind of integrates in, really, and trouble starts.
Yeah. And I suppose that's how it starts for a lot of kids in communities, in the sense that they get in, if you like, in inverted commas, with the wrong crowd, and they start to kind of go towards that angle. And you mentioned drugs. I mean, where do drugs come into this? I mean, where does that element come in?
Well, back in the day, I didn't even know what drugs were, what they actually were. So when I was dealing drugs at that age, I didn't even know what I was dealing. Didn't have a clue what it were. It was just making a little bit of money, and we wanted to be like the older crowd. They was doing it. They was making a lot of money and wearing the nice clothes and stuff. And this is the stuff that we wanted to have. So it's kind of all set around that, and it hasn't changed today. It's practically the same. Like, money makes the world go round in young people's minds and stuff, and they see all this stuff glamorized on the TV and the jewelry and the gold teeth and the Range Rovers, and that's something that stands out to them, and that's why they get involved. But then sometimes it's not even just that. Kids are exploited and groomed into that, with leading them to believe that is what that life is going to bring them. But actually, unbeknown, that isn't what it's going to bring them at all. It's just going to bring a lot of destruction for themselves as well as their families.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that you had a very personal experience when it came to, I guess we could talk wider violence, to kind of start with, but presumably that then trickled into kind of an episode where you experienced knife crime in a very personal way. Do you want to kind of tell us a bit more about that situation as well?
So yeah, when I was younger, I was a kid that didn't really care. Really, I didn't really care about anything, and I didn't care who I'd upset. I didn't care who I'd offend. Like, it didn't really matter to me. So what happened? I had a situation with a couple of lads that had come onto our estate. As pathetic as that sounds, it does sound pathetic now when you look back at it. Now I'm older, but a couple of lads that had come onto my estate, and I had a fight with one of these lads. And back then I used to smoke a bit of weed, but to get some weed I had to go over to their estate and use the phone box, because back in the 90s we didn't have mobile phones. Only the people that had a lot of money had the phones. And what happened was, the person that I had a fight with a couple of weeks previous to that was in the crowd of these lads. And it was kind of one of their moments. It was like, do I run? Do I stay? Do I just deal with it? And I chose to stay where I were. And it turned out they jumped me. About six of them jumped me, and then I got stabbed with a carving knife in the leg. So that was it was quite effective. But at the time, even though I survived, luckily I survived, because there's a lot of people out there that don't survive when they get stabbed, and luckily I did. But even then, it was just I think it was like a badge of honor, really. I've been stabbed. I've been, the stories that you can go around telling people, I've been stabbed. Or it becomes a badge of honor, not actually knowing the consequence of what happened or what could have happened. Now I realise that obviously getting older and growing up and doing what I do for a living, it actually helps me as the fact of realising exactly what the consequences of that were.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, so I know something happened with regarding one of your friends, didn't it, with regards to knife crime, and not just you, but people who you've been close to. Do you want to talk us through that bit of it as well?
So one of my best friends that I grew up with, he started hanging around with this lad that was new. He was new to the area, but we didn't really like him. We thought he was a bit of a dodgy guy. So we basically said to my pal, look, you're going to have to stay away from him. He's bad news. He's going to end up getting you in trouble. He was like, nah, he's all right. He's perfectly fine. So anyway, we were standing on this area in my estate where I lived in St. Anne's, and there was this car just comes shooting up the traffic lights. And a couple of these guys got out, but one of them ran up towards us as a crowd. So we've all scattered and gone, like just, disappeared out the way. But my pal stayed froze. He was just frozen on the wall. And we were shouting like, come, like, run. And he just literally froze. The fight, flight, or freeze scenario. He just froze. And the lad just ran up and put a carving knife straight in his chest. So once that had happened, he'd run off and got back in the car. And I've run up to my pal, and he's like literally fell back off of the wall with his legs still over the wall, just basically blowing out blood. Like he got stabbed in the heart. So we didn't know that at the time, but I'm trying to hold him and keep him alive. So it didn't work out.
Absolutely shocking. And I think the most shocking thing about that is it's been replicated so many times in the last few years, hasn't it? What I mean, the first thing I'm supposed to ask is how do you personally, I mean, how has this affected you, do you think, in your life, that incident? I mean, do you think about it? Do you have nightmares over it? I mean, how does it affect you personally?
When I was younger, when it happened, I did. It affected me a little bit, but then I got involved with drugs. So, drugs, there was a lot of stuff. I've had a lot of traumas happen in my life anyway, not just only like with the knife crime, but things personally, family-wise and stuff like that. So I've had a lot of stuff to block out along my years of destruction that was, that I was leading. It was just, making a lot of bad choices. So at the beginning, it did affect me. I was having bad dreams, and he died in my arms, on my legs. So having to go through something like that at 15, 16, it's not nice to see something like that with especially your best friend you grew up with since a kid. But around that age, about that point, 16, 17, was when I did get involved with drugs. So when I'd found the drug that obviously I'd liked, I carried on and continued to take that drug, and it blocked a lot of stuff out for me. And I never had to think about it until I went to rehabilitation. So when I went to rehabilitation, then I had to start talking about these things a little bit more, and I had to do life stories and stuff of all the bad stuff that had happened, so you can learn to cope and deal with it. And I struggled for a very, very long time. It was something that I didn't really think I had to ever look at again. But to manage to get over the drug problem and keep going back to the drugs and they're using them as triggers, I had no choice. So but no, to be fair, now as there is still effects, because I don't use knives. Like my missus, anyone that knows me, they'll tell you, like when I'm eating my dinners, I don't use a knife. I can cut a steak up with a fork, as mad as that sounds. I don't use the knife at all. So in just little bits, it makes me on edge. Knives make me on edge, and that's why when I hear kids talking about knives and they're trying to glorify, even if they're just messing about in a conversation, I come down really hard on them, because it's not a joke. Yeah,
absolutely. And I suppose culturally, I know that on Teachers Talk Radio we had Catherine Burblesing on a couple of months ago. She's Social Mobility Commissioner in the UK, and she was talking about the impact of culture on kind of I guess the way youths would see knives or guns or whatever. And I think she was referencing Stormzy and wearing a stab vest and all that kind of stuff. And she her view was that this is impacting
youth culture in a negative sense, and that's almost the cause of it. Although the counter argument to that is that other things are the cause of it, and that is just a symptom of the cause. So, I mean, I wondered what your view is in terms of what do you think is the cause behind the increase in knife crime? Because when I was, 13, 14, obviously I didn't grow up in London, so it's a completely different context. I grew up in sunny Birkenhead, Carl, which, you're probably not going to visit unless, there you go, a wonderful place. But if you were to kind of think, if I was to think back to my age at 13, 14 or whatever, I can't remember ever a conversation about knives. I can still remember now that somebody in my school actually pulled out a penknife and said, "I've got a penknife." Right now, this was when knife crime was not in the news at all. This was like way, and I was really shocked. I was like, "Why have you got that?" Now, nowadays, somebody's just asked on the chat, "How old are you now, Tom?" I am 36 years old, and actually, I'm 37 in 2 weeks. So I don't know how I've got this far, to be honest with you, but here we are. But I think all I'm saying is back then I didn't see that kind of publicity around knife crime. So I'm asking you, what has changed? What is causing this change?
I think number one, poverty. There's no money anywhere anymore. So, you used to have all the youth clubs and, activities and stuff for these kids to do, and no one's pumping any money into it. So what the kids are just congregating around on the streets, causing absolute chaos. So when that happens, so let's say, I'm not going to say this is all gang related, because that would be unfair to say. It's not all gang related. You've got different aspects of knife crime and bladed article offences, which could be, like again, I say in the song, like domestic violence, you've got terrorism, you've got loads of different aspects of knife crime that you have. But yeah, you have got a high percentage of it, which is based around knife crime. So if you've got gangs or gang members or the older gang members that are trying to do recruiting of stuff, if these younger kids haven't got anywhere else to go and they're just congregating on the street, they're easy pickings for people. Very, very easy pickings. And that's where they're going to go. And where they're congregating on certain estates, they see the old main guys of the other estates and they want to be exactly like that. And that's where it's easy to pick them up, because they're so easy to groom in, because where you're talking about poverty, parents are going out to like pay the bills. They're making ends meet just to pay the bills. There's no money for the kids. So they haven't got the next best pair of trainers that kid at school's got, or they haven't got that coat that person's got, and they haven't got this or that. So where else are they going to be able to get that from? Where are they going to get that from? So they're going to be acceptant of someone offering them something to go and do it. Like, oh yeah, I'll give you £100 a week if you go and sell a little bit of that for me. They're going to agree to it because it's £100 a week. I'll take you to JD. I'll get you a brand new pair of trainers. Oh, will you? Yeah, come get your pair of trainers. They think their Christmases will come at once because parents can't pay for that. So I think poverty is a lot to it, and no funding being streamed into the services that they should do.
I suppose the counter argument that you will see to that from the right, for example, or from others might be, well, was there worse poverty in the 70s or 80s, but less youth crime or less problems with youth crime? That would be their counter argument. They would say, that earnings of, I guess, that's what they would say. I suppose to counter that is they would say, well, poverty was worse in the 70s and 80s than it is now. So why have we now got a problem with youth violence and youth crime in this sense now? That would be the counter argument. But obviously,
generations change. Generations change. Back in the 70s and the 80s, when I was a kid, there wasn't so much around knife crime. We'd have a fight with our fists. We'd be punching up with our fists. And the same with when you go back to the 60s and like the mods and stuff like that. It's all fists and stuff. Yeah, probably a couple of sticks here and there, but not pulling out the big Rambo machete knives and stabbing each other in the stomach with them. It's just no. So the generations have changed, and yeah. I'm not going to blame anything to do with like grime artists and, but when it comes to certain drill musics that you listen to, I like the commercial drill music. I'm not going to slate commercial drill music at all, because some of it I like and I do listen to myself. But some of the drill music that I do listen to, I don't agree with, and I don't understand why YouTube even allows it to come on where they're talking about the person they murdered 2 weeks before, basically hotting themselves up really stupidly anyway, putting out there that they've stabbed this person and that person, go and shank this one, that. I don't understand why that stuff's even allowed out on YouTube. It shouldn't be, because it is glamorizing that lifestyle. So our generation now seem to be followers of the generation that we've got growing up. They seem to be followers, and they're seeming not to be like, they want to be like themselves, be you as a person. They want to be like others. So where they want to be like others, they're following in that direction. That's why it's getting bad.
Right, Carl, stay right there, because we are going to go for a little news break now for 2 minutes, because I can feel like we're cranking it up, you know, to proper anger levels, you know, like we're gradually getting there. So in a couple of minutes, we'll be back, and we're going to continue our chat. And I want to kind of move it on, I suppose, to now a little bit more in terms of what you're doing now, and what you're going to be doing now, and what you're trying to be doing. We've had a few texts in, by the way. Kat
I can see,
says, "I like Carl. You're a passionate person, Carl, and you have text saying thanks." I feel like I'm in the third person right now. It's quite strange to say you
Stop texting. Get involved.
Yeah, I can't. But listen, I'll tell you what. We will be back in 2 minutes after this little break. And we'll hopefully continue the conversation. Good evening, everybody. I hope you are well, and thanks for tuning in to Teachers Talk Radio. This Monday evening, we are talking about knife crime prevention. I've been joined by Carl Scott, who is still with me, actually, and we'll be talking a little bit more imminently about preventing knife crime in schools before talking to Tom Jewkes, who is my second guest on Teachers Talk Radio this evening. We are live on Podbean, on our website, on LinkedIn, on YouTube, everywhere. Welcome back to the show, Carl. How are you doing? Are you still with us?
Yeah, I'm still here. I'm still listening to the news. Interesting.
Interesting news, wasn't it? And actually, for those people who are watching this, and I know there's some people on YouTube and LinkedIn and so on, somebody is actually, Carl, we've got a question here. Are you going to read out my poem, Carl? From
Is that Eugene? Yes, yeah. Mate. What are you saying?
Right. Well, if you want to do that.
I haven't actually got it because if I close the app, I won't be able to get. I won't be able to get the app. Yeah.
We don't want to do that. But
I tell you what, Eugene, what I'll do is I'll email your poem over to Tom, so then he can have that poem.
There you go. Or he could just download the Podbean app and actually call into the show and read the poem himself. I mean, that is something that he could do if he wanted to. But yeah, Carl, just to recap on what we've been talking about so far, we've talked about the fact that knife crime is widespread. We've talked a little bit about your story and how you came to experience knife crime firsthand, and some of the problematic experiences that you had. And I just wondered, what have you? Because I know we talked about this prior to going on. I know you've experienced that gang culture as well firsthand in prison. Yeah. And I wondered what it was like in there compared to out there.
Well, the difference, to be fair,
that's a tough question. I'm full of them.
Yeah. Prison is how you make it. So, like it is very inconvenient, obviously, but you have to be put in there for the crimes that you've committed and take full responsibility for that, etc. But the thing is, what I do try and say to kids is, if the worst thing happens and whatever you do does put you into prison, just remember that whoever you've upset outside and they're involved in the same stuff that you're obviously involved in, you're also going to bump into them in that. But the difference is you can't run anywhere when you're inside. So all your nightmares will probably come at once. But the thing is, I think that, when it comes to gangs and stuff inside, you do get asked who you're affiliated with once you go in, so they know where to put you and where not to put you, But a lot of people don't admit that they're in gangs when they go into jail. And then, they get put on a wing and someone's on there that they've upset outside. So, yeah.
What would you say to a student? Because we've got a lot of teachers, obviously, listening to this, watching this. What and you've seen this firsthand, but what would your advice to them be? Not just the teachers, but also the kids. I mean, what would you say to the kids and to the teachers if they are feeling worried about a student getting involved in a gang? What would your advice be to the teacher? But also, what would you say to a student who was saying, well, you know what, I'm in a gang? I mean, what do you say to them to kind of turn them away from that path? I mean, what kind of things would you say to them to turn them away from that path?
The student give a lot of grisly stories of what I've actually seen, and I'm sure any stories that I can say would actually ring true to some of these kids anyway. I've been there, done it. I've been one of the older people with the younger kids as well. So it's not nice, but some of these kids where they get involved in it, but they don't actually want to get involved in it. But they see no other way out from getting involved in it because they're scared, and they get a lot of scaremongering going on with it as well. But I'm not going to say all of them do, you know, because a lot of them enjoy being in a gang for some mad reason. But like I said to you at the beginning, it's like a sense, you're getting that sense of fulfillment. It's like a family, like it's a family outside than what you have indoors. So you're not seeing, unless you're doing all your little gang signs and stuff and your postcodes and whatever, you know, you're affiliated. Actually, yeah, I'm with a gang. But the ones that actually don't affiliate like that and they're just crowded, you're just seeing as friends. So they wouldn't class it as being in a gang. But I always sit there and tell my personal stories, because I've got a lot of stories that's enough to put anyone off, to be fair. And if it doesn't put you off for getting involved, you're nuts, you're mad, you want to get involved in that. Teachers. So with teachers, it's really hard to approach, right? So I'm not judgmental with teachers and stuff, and you know, a lot of kids. It depends.
Well, you better haven't be, Carl, because you're on Teachers Talk Radio, so you're gonna have.
I'm sorry, people.
You're gonna be.
No, what I'm trying to say is there's a lot of kids gel with certain people, and obviously at school you're going to have a set teacher that you really, really do gel with. So the kid is more likely to listen to the teacher they gel with. So if there's another teacher that's separate to that the relationship is a little bit on off with that young person, find out what teacher they actually do gel with, and you know, let that teacher know that, look, I've got a couple of worries about Joe Blogs. We think that he might be getting involved in something just by a couple of sentences that he's come out that's a little bit concerning. Would you mind having a little chat? And then pass it on to someone that they've actually got a bit of a rapport with, because your outcome for that's probably going to be a lot better. I mean, with me, for example, I'm like I say, I'm from the street. So when I had my job in a secondary school, my approach was me, basically. I didn't try to be anything that I wasn't. I haven't been to university. I haven't even got any GCSEs because of the lifestyle that I led. So everything that I've learned of how to approach things, I've learned by myself, really. I mean, professionally wise, I worked on an early intervention program that Sussex Police set up. And I was on that program for about 2 years, which I was going in and out of schools, running workshops and doing one-to-ones with different kids. That was classed at that point. They was classed at that point of early intervention, you know. So it started from like 11 to 17. So that there really built up my expertise with having employment, you know, like acting professional and, you know, the buzzwords and stuff, things you can say, things you can't say. So that kind of gave me a lot of experience on that point of it. But I brought to that job my life experience. So that's why I was so successful in the work that I did. And I worked with over 77 kids and only 4 of them didn't make the program. So a lot of them did well. And the crime rate in our area for that, for ASB and for diversions into positive activities, it went down really well. So yeah, that's basically all I can say with the teacher thing, really. I think it's just listening. I think with teachers, I think it'd do you well with doing a lot more training around county lines and gangs and stuff, and knowing about keywords, because words change constantly, like words for weed and words for heroin and words for knives and stuff. That all these words change. And a good project that can help you with that is the St. Giles Trust. And they were set up by a gang member and stuff. So they're all basically ex-gang members. So I think like 78% of them are all ex-gang members. So that project's brilliant. They do a lot of training. I've done a couple of training with myself personally, even though I know about it all. But it's always good to keep yourself vamped up with a lot of the new comings with kids.
Yeah, that's a great shout. I mean, I've not heard about that. I'm sure all the listeners who are listening now or listening back have heard of that, but it sounds like a really good. I know that Tom's going to come on and we will talk about the teaching resources side of things. So we will talk a little bit about how we can actually talk and teach about knife crime. So yeah, so Carl, I mean, I've watched. I mean, I want to really give you a little plug in terms of your stuff on your kind of YouTube and your Instagram, because I watched the video that you did in a school of your talk in a school, and it was really impactful, and I would recommend that people do have a watch of it, because it is really good, and you know the kids seem to respond well. I mean, did they respond well to your talk? I mean, did any of them come up to you afterwards and say anything to you, or?
Yeah, I had so basically the plug where we was just talking about. So like if you type in Carl Scott knife crime, it will come up straight away. It's like a cartoony picture of me stood behind like an anti-knife crime sign. Yeah, it did. To be fair, I think a good workshop is where you're stood in front of kids and they're not saying a thing and they're just staring at you.
It sounds
Because
like my
if they're-
lessons, that, Cole. Don't talk about my lessons publicly, please. We talked about this before. All right.
But that means they're listening, okay? That means they're listening. So if they're listening, that's good. If they're talking to their friend next to them and having little whispers in their ears, they're not paying attention. And not one kid did that for the whole workshop that I did. There was a couple of kids at the back that was, dressed in the hood rich hoodies and stuff that they was wearing. Like I call them chavvy tracksuits, but they was wearing them, and yeah, so I thought, I'll kind of, every time I'm doing a little bit of a conversation about certain things, because I'm not someone that judges a book by its cover, but their attitude told me exactly what they do. So I basically kind of looked at them on a few of occasions, and surprisingly, when it come to the end and it was time to ask questions, they asked the questions. So that was good. So what I was setting out to do at that point, it actually paid off, because they was asking questions. They come up to me, they shook my hand. Well, I tell a lie. They didn't shook my hand. They sputtered me like respect, So I kind of had to do it back, didn't I? Do you know what I mean? So, but yeah, it was really, really good. Thanks to Hitchin College, Hertfordshire. They a lady called Vicky that I did a live on my Instagram with, got me hooked up with that. And I've got a cameraman and stuff, so I thought I'd turn it into a little educational information video kind of thing and just bang it out there and put it on. I wrote a bit of a rap song to it. I can't rap, but it's not about the rapping, it's about the words that's in the song. And I basically put everything relevant on it. But what you was talking about at the start with about Ava White, the poor girl that was killed at Christmas lights with John, I have used that. I've got a couple of news articles at the end of the song. One from Birmingham, the MP that was stabbed, David, he was stabbed, and then I used Ava White as well, because they're just getting younger. It's just crazy. So I just thought that would be really impactful in the song if I did use like news articles. It makes people listen. It's a shocking tactic, and the words that I used, there was all real words. It's all about media. The media is quick to televise, but they ain't doing anything to help stop it. The amount of money that these companies, the Sun, the Daily Mirror, all these newspapers, they could pump loads of money into our communities, but instead they just televise the stabbings that have happened, and they're not doing much about it. And that's why I've used the words that I used in the song, just to make it more impactful, really.
Carl, it's been absolutely fantastic chatting to you. We could go on and on and on. It's been brilliant. Just can you give everyone a shout? I know we've already kind of mentioned it, but just in case anybody wants to get in touch with you or whatever, where can they find you? What can they do to get in touch?
Yeah, well, my Instagram's Cole Scott Official. It's as it says on there, and I do respond to as many people as I can. I'm so busy with different talks that I do and filming, etc. I've got part 2, by the way, coming out for that YouTube thing, so there will be a part 2. I'll be going around a few prisons that I've been in. And I've even got an interview with my auntie as well to tell a bit about my life.
Wow.
As well, so that'll be interesting. Yeah. So it was a push getting her on, but she's agreed. So that's good.
Well, I think we need to get you. I think the next time you come on here, we need you and your auntie on here, and me, and I can interview both of you. That's what we need.
That'd be fun. Yeah. But no, Instagram Cole Scott Official. It's there. It's an open page. It's my business page. That's where I do all my stuff, Instagram lives, etc., with loads of different people in the community. And my YouTube's Cole Scott Official as well. But for the actual documentary, it's Cole Scott Knife Crime, and that should come up straight away.
Carl, thanks ever so much for giving up your time on to come on here. It's been a really good chat, and I will speak to you again at some point in the future. That was Carl, and that was Carl talking about his experience of knife crime in his community and actually growing up. I just want to say thanks to everybody who is listening to this live on ttr.org. We've had a message in there from Eugene saying, absolute top man, Scott. Highly inspirational man. I don't think we can disagree with that. I'm very inspired by Carl just from listening to him there for 45 minutes in terms of what he's been through in his life and how he's come through from that and what he's trying to do now to make a difference to people. So absolutely fantastic and a brilliant interview. And we've had lots of comments, and I'm sure that Carl will see those on Podbean, and I'm sure everyone listening back, if you're listening back to this as a podcast, then obviously feel free to get in touch with us at Teachers Talk Radio. It's at teacherstalkradio@gmail.com. And we will forward on any messages that you might have if you happen to not have social media and you're just listening back as a podcast. And by the way, if you are listening to this live on Podbean, we're not just live on mobile audio today. We're also live on YouTube, on LinkedIn, and on Twitter. And you can find us at TT Radio 2022 on Twitter. You can watch this there. You can watch it on LinkedIn. And I know we've got plenty of people who are tuning into that and will be watching it back as well on there. So if that's you, thank you for watching this back. And I hope you enjoyed and got a lot out of that interview. I'm now going to be joined, hopefully, by my second guest. And that is Tom. Good evening, Tom. Hello. I can hear you perfectly well. How are you this evening? Good. Excellent. I'm glad. I am doing very well. It's a difficult topic, as you know. I'm sure you know. I'll let you introduce yourself in a minute. Yeah, I'll let you introduce yourself in a minute. It's a tough topic to cover. I think Carl's done a fantastic job. But I wanted to bring you on here to maybe offer a different perspective, which is very much from the educational side of things in terms of zooming in, if you like, on what teachers can do in the classroom. We've looked at the impact of knife crime, what knife crime is, the figures, the statistics. So what can we actually do about it? But I thought before we get on to that, do you want to just introduce yourself to the listeners on Teachers Talk Radio?
Sure. Thank you very much for having me. So my name's Tom Jewkes, and I'm the regional manager for a charity called the Ben Kinsella Trust. The Ben Kinsella Trust was set up following the murder of Ben, which took place in 2008. And we exist as a charity to educate and empower young people on knife crime, giving them knowledge, awareness, and enabling them to kind of make choices to keep themselves safe. And also we campaign for justice and action for those affected by knife crime, and have done so successfully for many, many years. And we have been successful in getting a few key bits of legislation through Parliament, through our campaigning work. Most notably a law which is called Ben's Law, which raised the minimum sentence for knife-related murder to 25 years. So that's who I work for, sorry. And yeah, in terms of where we are today, we have 3 permanent exhibition sites at which we run our Choices and Consequences workshops, which are anti-knife crime workshops. And we use the stories of not just Ben, but other young people as well, so that young people can kind of live and breathe and walk through the footsteps of victims of knife crime and offenders of knife crime, and have a really unique and kind of immersive experience to hopefully challenge and offer a counter narrative to some of the myths that they might believe when it comes to knife crime. So that's who we are. That's where we've come in about 12, 13 years.
And what's your role at the Ben Kinsella Trust?
So I'm the regional manager. So I should kind of preface everything that I say today that I do have a very London-centric view of knife crime, I'm sorry to say. And that's because I am based in London. So I manage all of our operations across, at the moment, our 2 London sites. We've got one in Islington, and then one over in East London in Barking and Dagenham.
Yeah, fantastic. I might actually, I know Carl is still with us actually, and what I might do later on, if he's still about, is bring him back in just to ask you if he's got any questions for you. But certainly from my perspective, I wanted to ask you a little bit about who Ben Kinsella was. You mentioned this terrible, tragic incident happened in 2008, but sometimes we don't necessarily hear as much about the lives of the victims of these crimes. We tend to hear about the crime itself and what happened, and we tend to get actually very little on the victims sometimes in terms of who they were as people.
Yeah, absolutely. I think in many ways we are becoming a little bit desensitized to knife crime. We're constantly looking at statistics and names in a newspaper, but when you actually uncover some of the stories behind those names, it really brings to light how much of a serious issue it is. Ben was a average, regular, normal, for want of a better word, teenager from Islington. He was not dissimilar from most teenagers. He had his friends, his hobbies, and in June 2008, Ben and his friends were out celebrating the end of their GCSE exams. So he was 16 years old. And on that night, there was a group of older boys who had some sort of altercation earlier that evening, which we know was actually nothing to do with Ben and his friends. But anyway, they ran up to Ben and his friends outside a pub. His friends ran off, but for some reason, Ben stopped running. And when he did so, the older boys caught up with him and stabbed him to death. So it's very much a, completely senseless attack, as so many of these attacks are. And yeah, that was the end of his life. And, he left behind, like most, if not all, knife crime victims, a whole family and friends and community who were grieving. So the short answer to your question is Ben was a pretty normal teenage boy from Islington in London. And after his murder, his family decided that they wanted to do something to kind of keep his legacy alive, and also so that no other family would have to go through what they've been through. And they set up the Ben Kinsella Trust. And Ben's sister, Brooke Kinsella, a lot of people listening may be familiar with, because she was actually at the time in EastEnders.
I remember. Yeah, I remember.
So having quite a kind of high profile, public facing job, she obviously used that platform to really highlight this issue of knife crime. The year that Ben was murdered, Ben was the 17th teenager in London to be murdered in 2008. And there were 29 teenagers murdered in 2008 in London. And as I'm sure most, if not all of the people listening saw the news, at the tail end of last year, it was 30. So it's broken the record.
And that's just deaths. I mean, presumably there's a lot of other instances involving knives that we don't hear about or don't result in fatalities.
Well, exactly. I mean, in the 12 months to June 2021, there were over 4,000 hospital admissions. Wow. For injuries as a result of a knife or a sharp article. So, yeah, that is just teenage deaths in one place in London. So beyond that, I think in 2021 there were 122 knife-related murders in London.
Yeah, so it's a huge number when you think about it. I mean, I suppose I don't know. I'd be interested to know in the US. Got a huge problem with guns, haven't they? And God willing, that won't spread to here in the sense that guns replace knives. I'm not saying that guns are better than knives, by the way, but just that I suppose in the US they might look at that and say, well, we've got a massive problem with guns. I mean, what is this thing about? Why has knife crime emerged since the 2000s, or has it always been there, but we haven't reported it? It seems to have got a lot more publicity. Is it because of gangs? Is it the prevalence of gangs now, whereas before it wasn't? I mean, what's changed?
I'm going to directly contradict what you've just said, Tom.
Please do, Tom. That's what you're here for. I talk a lot of rubbish on here, so please.
No, not at all. And I'm going to say that actually knife crime is not something that's recently emerged. It's definitely, come to the forefront, of our kind of media channels. It's definitely for want of a better phrase, a hot topic at the moment. But if you look at the statistics over the last 10 to 15 years, it's been a constant problem in our society. yes, there are certain drivers of knife crime that are dissimilar to other types of criminality, and yes, there have been increases. It's quite hard at the moment to tell when you look at the data, because the COVID pandemic has just completely skewed everything. But this is a result of many things, including, over a decade now of, cuts to budgets, which have affected youth services, which have taken opportunities away from young people to pursue something positive in their life. But yeah, there are drivers which are a bit more nuanced when it comes to knife crime, particularly around things like social media, certain types of music, which really glamorize the use of knives, which glamorize violence. So yeah, social media has a huge part to play in it, which I guess, we didn't have that 20 years ago, did we? And then, I've just seen the comment that you've put up on the screen, which says, that knives are so easily purchased, which is true. And, despite the fact that it is illegal for any retailer shop to sell a knife to a person under 18, we know, and there have been cases where this has happened, and big brands have been, dragged through the courts for doing this, which is a deterrent, but it still happens. And there are people online wanting to make, a quick bit of cash, and can list themselves on a big e-commerce platform, and it probably will get taken down after a certain period of time, but it's too late by that point.
Absolutely. Easily available, and obviously in unfortunately, and seems to be growing. I mean, as we've said, it was a record year last year. Now, in terms of the work that you do, so we know now who Ben was, and what you do. But I wondered, can you give us some examples of what you've done since 2008 to try and stop more knife crime happening? What are you actually doing?
So our kind of flagship program is what we call our Choice and Consequences program, which is essentially a workshop which takes place in a purpose-built exhibition. And I can say with a lot of confidence that it is completely unique in terms of tackling knife crime. So when our trust was established, Ben's family, kind of spearheaded by Ben Kinsella, did a huge amount of research into what was out there, what services were out there to tackle knife crime. And when it came to sort of intervention or early intervention programs, we found that there were actually a huge number of very, very good high quality services that would surround themselves around a young person when they'd kind of started to go down the wrong path, which was fantastic. So we thought, okay, well, what we want to do going forward is something that's actually preventative. Just in the same way that in schools across the country, there's over recent decades been a huge push to have lessons on things like financial literacy and, how to get a loan and things like that, which, I certainly didn't have when I was younger. We need to take the same public health approach to the issue of knife crime, because it is an issue which is so harmful to society. So that's what we set out to do. And one of the key inspirations behind the Ben Kinsella Trust's work was actually the Turing Anne Frank Museum, which a lot of people might be surprised to hear. And what that experience allowed people to do was to walk through the footsteps of Anne Frank and her family, and to experience and live what that was like for them to be living in, occupied Holland. So we wanted to see if we could try and create the same experience with knife crime. And that's exactly what we did. So when young people walk, through our exhibition spaces and take part in our workshops, they will make their way through a series of different kind of immersive rooms, they will obviously learn about Ben and his life and his family. We have really interactive places, some of which include a mock prison cell. We use actors. So we don't really shy away from the topic or the subject, but we do try and deliver something which is impactful, unique, but also kind of trauma informed, which I'm sure we'll come onto this later in terms of what approaches we don't agree with, and that's something that kind of informs our work, making sure that it's done in the right way and doesn't instill a sense of fear in young people, because that's really the last thing that we would ever want to do, and it doesn't work, and we know that fear is one of the key drivers of any area of criminality, and especially knife crime. How
does knife crime impact families in particular of victims and also of perpetrators? I mean, what? Because I don't know, if I'm honest, what the impact is. I mean, obviously you've got grief and so on, but I don't know. You tell me. What is the impact?
I only know to a certain extent. I do work for the Ben Kinsella Trust. I know and have met Ben's family, and we do also work with other families as well, to kind of co-create some of our educational resources and spaces. But I myself, luckily, I've never had a close family member or friend even die from a knife crime attack. I have had friends who have been attacked with a knife. But yeah, how does it affect families? Well, from my experience of speaking with those who have been affected by it, it's just so lasting. It's just, Ben was murdered 13, 14 years ago. In fact, last year he would have been 30 years old. And for his family, and he's just one person, it's had such a lasting effect. It's something that never goes away, and it's the ripple effect of crime. It's not just Ben, it's not just his immediate family, it's not just his friends. It's maybe stops at his local community, but once that happens a few times over, it's systemic. It just goes beyond that. It creates this kind of national sense of fear almost, which it's a vicious cycle.
I was going to ask you, actually, just to cut in there, because I know you work with kids and whatever doing these workshops. I mean, do many of them express fear about going out and all that kind of stuff? Because I know we've seen that in the recent articles with the BBC and so on. They have talked about this in terms of kids saying this and that. But does that apply around the country, or is that, would you say that's more a London-centric thing? I mean,
yes, it does apply around the country. There's definitely a heightened sense of fear of knife crime in London, because if you look at the figures, it does happen. It's massively disproportionate when you look at the stats from London compared to anywhere else. But having said that, knife crime is a national issue, and there's very, very few corners of the UK that haven't been touched by it. So do young people express a sense of fear? Yes. So at the Ben Kinsella Trust, we work with thousands of young people, not just in London. We also have a permanent site up in Nottingham as well, in partnership with the National Justice Museum. And we ask every single young person who comes to our space through an anonymous survey whether or not they are worried or anxious about knife crime in their local area. And there's a very, very high proportion of young people that say that they are. And we know even further that if a young person is fearful of knife crime, that they are far more likely to have to admit that they have carried or have thought about carrying a knife. So fear is a huge driver of carrying a knife. And if you were to ask, any young person, and I mean young, down to sort of upper primary aged, you're 5, 6, why a young person might choose to carry a knife, they have a very, very clear sense that it's to protect yourself, which sounds like a very simple statement, but you have to really dissect that and think about that very, very carefully as, as an adult, as a teacher or a practitioner, that, we've arrived at a place in society where the vast majority, and I mean the vast majority, 99%, will quite easily come to that conclusion that carrying a knife, carrying a dangerous weapon, is perfectly acceptable if it is to protect you. And that's kind of one of the key myths around knife carrying, really, that a knife will protect you. We know from the stats that it does the exact opposite. It puts your life in danger. If you carry a knife and try to use that knife against somebody, you are more likely, there's a 51+% chance that knife will actually be used against you. And it's in reality, it's way higher than 51%, but you are more likely to have that used against you. So those kind of myths, and they are myths, are kind of what perpetuate this acceptance of knife carrying. And at the Ben Kinsella Trust, that's that we're trying to create peer values that will completely eradicate knife carrying, and make it completely unacceptable within any peer group to carry a knife.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Everything you've said there. We're going to literally 2 minutes just listen to some messages from our wonderful supporters of Teachers Talk Radio. So we'll be back in 2 minutes, Ben, where I want to ask you next about teaching in school about knife crime. So the do's and don'ts. Maybe have a think about some resources that teachers could use and how they could approach it in the classroom and even beyond the classroom as well. Maybe some projects that you know of and so on and so forth. So absolutely brilliant chat so far. Really enjoyed it, and we'll be back in 2 minutes. Me, Tom Rogers, and we are live as usual on the Late Show this Monday night, standing in for Emily Fuller-Runshaw, who will be back in February at some point with her usual 8 p.m. Late Show. I'm not sure where I'll be going. Maybe, I don't know, maybe the morning, maybe a midweek morning. I don't know. I'll fit in somewhere. I'll go somewhere. But we are really looking forward to Emily returning. And thanks very much to everybody who has tuned in this evening, especially Miss Saoirse, because I know she's liked the show up 50 times. So I'm glad you're enjoying this show, Miss Saoirse. I really, really appreciate that. And I am joined still by my wonderful guest, Tom, not Ben. Tom, not Ben.
Don't worry. The amount of emails I receive, phone calls I get where I'm addressed as Ben, I'm used to it. Don't worry.
Yeah. We have been joined by Tom from the Ben Kinsella Trust, and Tom has been talking to us very kindly about how teachers can approach the teaching of knife crime in school with a view to preventing it from happening. So we've talked a little bit about the background to Ben himself and the setting up of the foundation and what the problems are. So let's move on to actually what teachers can do about this and what you think. So I thought I'd start by asking, is there a general approach that you think works in schools when it comes, from your experience, when it comes to preventing knife crime?
I think the key thing to start off with is plan to talk about knife crime. It sounds simple, but it wasn't. It's not really until the last 5 to 10 years where we would even be having this conversation. So just in the same way that schools are so fantastic and teachers are so dedicated to creating responsible citizens, they want students to walk out of their school and take part in civic society in so many different ways. That knife crime prevention is now and should really be quite high up the agenda when it comes to PHSE lessons or anything like that. So that'd be my first thing. I plan to talk about it. Secondly, there's definitely some difficult topics within it, and it's important to acknowledge that and understand the drivers. Like I've said already, one of the key drivers of knife crime is fear. So be very mindful of that. You try and kind of set the scene, which it is a very serious problem, but we know from the national data and also from the data that we gather that actually the vast majority of young people have never and will never carry a knife, and it's worth remembering that. In our work at the Ben Kinsella Trust, everything that we do, we try to do in a very kind of open, safe place. We allow young people to ask us whatever they want. There's no silly questions, and understand that we will give them, an honest answer. And we never ever want to be kind of pointing the finger at a young person and saying, "Don't do this or don't do that." I'm sure lots of teachers will kind of agree with that. That sure, when I was a kid, if someone told me to do something, then I wouldn't, and if they told me not to, then I would. So just kind of equipping young people with the facts on knife crime, but in a kind of trauma-informed way and in a way that doesn't cause a sense of fear or panic, because that will just, make the problem worse. The other kind of general approach that we have at the Ben Kinsella Trust is to try and provide an experience that young people can have an emotional or an empathetic response to. That's so important in the way that we deliver our work. So that might be, a real life story, like we've heard from Carl today, or that might be, through an experience. There are lots of other workshops out there, but for example, one of the things that you can do if you are based in London or in Nottingham is come and visit, one of the Ben Kinsella Trust's exhibitions. And if you're located in certain boroughs, they're fully funded and free of charge, and there is nothing else really that will kind of provide such an immersive and experiential way of learning about knife crime. So that's something that obviously I would recommend. But in terms of general approaches, I think, to sum up, just talk about it, make it part of the culture in your school that you can talk about serious issues, acknowledge that it's difficult and sometimes scary to talk about, ensure that anything that you do does not kind of instill fear in young people. And then you'll be kind of off to a good start. And finally, all I would add is tackle the myths first. The myth that a knife crime, that carrying a knife will protect you, it's just not true. You can, find lots of interesting data and infographics online. That is categorically not true. It puts your life in more danger. So those would be kind of my overarching principles when it comes to kind of dealing and tackling with knife crime. Yeah.
And in terms of, I mean, I wanted to ask you that makes perfect sense in terms of overarching principles. What about resources specifically? I mean, are there any resources that you point to in terms of somebody actually in the chat has mentioned UNICEF, which I hadn't even thought of, to be honest with you, in terms of resources for tackling knife crime. But are there any resources that you point to in your sessions that you think are good for teachers to use?
I mean, working for the Ben Kinsella Trust, I'll obviously have to mention our online resources. Yeah, absolutely. So there are resources out there. I guess if you have, like I said, if you are in one of those areas where we work, please use us as a resource, because in one of those resources includes our workshops, which, like I said, are free to many schools depending on your location, and they are like nothing else that I've worked in this sector for 10 years, and I've never seen anything so unique when it comes to knife crime. So that is a resource that you can and should access if you are in one of those locations. If you're not, then we at the Ben Kinsella Trust have a whole range of different online resources for teachers and practitioners, for parents, and for young people. So if you are wanting to recommend some of the resources to young people, we have our KnifeWise app, which is always a good starting point for tackling and busting some of the myths around knife crime. That's a really good kind of quick tool to
I'm just going to cut in there because we've had a comment here which I think is an interesting one, talking about myths. Eugene has said people are very quick to point the fingers at the parents, but it's not necessarily the lack of love and support within the home, but the overwhelming influence outside the home. I'm wondering whether you agree or disagree with that, or whether you think there's some truth in that, or what.
Yes, I think I'd say that's entirely true. I don't think the way in which a young person becomes involved in knife crime is often kind of they will often follow a similar path, but it very often comes out completely out of the blue for not just that young person's parents, but all the other kind of responsible adults in their life. And that's because it's something that can happen so easily, especially if young people have never had a conversation about it, have never been told, what these myths are around knife carrying. So yeah, I know, and I've worked with a few parents who've lost children to knife crime even, and never saw it coming ever. We do kind of have this idea that knife crime is primarily fueled by gangs, county lines, that sort of thing, which obviously it is, but that's not always the case. Definitely not.
Yeah. Well, I think that answered that one. What other? So you talked a bit about myths there. Sorry, we cut you off there, but
that's all right.
That was a good point, I thought, to interject with.
Yeah.
But what other myths are there then that we need to avoid, or teachers need to avoid?
So in terms of things to avoid,
or let's not say myth. Let's just things teachers shouldn't do. Basically, in your view.
I think teachers should obviously understand and recognize that there's only so much they can do, and there are certain young people, especially if they've really started to take several steps down that path, that they just will not be able to reach, and there's other very interventionist services that they need to tap into and refer into. Generally, like I said earlier, it's about not instilling fear. One of the key bits of research that is going on at the minute, which has been commissioned by the Violence Reduction Unit, is into the use of the image of knives, and this kind of happened as a result of I think the Metropolitan Police, who'd published over 2,000 images of knives in 1 year on their social media channels. And several authorities and bodies have said, this needs to stop. We understand that you're trying to show, look, all these knives have been seized, but all it does is create, fear amongst people and just feeds into the problem in the first place. So, like I said, it's really important to give a bit of perspective when it comes to knife crime, and just make young people understand that it is a preventable, avoidable situation. No one is born carrying a knife. It's a choice, and that choice has consequences to it. But certainly not, don't want to be scaring kids. I know it is important to not shy away from it and to share kind of real and authentic stories with young people so that they understand what the impact is, but in a kind of trauma-informed way.
Yeah, I mean, one of the teenagers in London in this report said, we tried to sugarcoat it, but they are already exposed to all of this, so we shouldn't sugarcoat it anymore. In terms of, I mean, they're talking specifically there about incidents of involving knife crime. And she was talking, this girl, specifically about how her brother bled to death. And it meant, by her explaining it in I guess, detail, that they understood the consequences more. That's her argument anyway, by not by speaking quite brutally about it. I mean, do you agree or disagree with that? Because that's obviously somebody who's there. And we've had another question as well on top of that from Joe, which I think is a very, very good question. This is on YouTube, by the way, for everybody listening on the app. And Joe's put a question there through YouTube. But how young would you say is a good age to start talking about knife crime? So I suppose part A, approach of being quite brutal about the truth. Is that good? And part B, how young is the right age to start talking about knife crime?
Being brutal about the truth, I'd maybe rephrase that.
That usually happens for me.
Yeah. I understand what you mean. Yeah, it's not an issue that we can shy away from. And at the Ben Kinsella Trust, we do not. We are purely focused on eradicating knife crime. We spend every single day of our lives, all our wonderful team, talking in detail about how knife injuries affect the body, how dangerous they are. We do not shy away from it. We talk, it's part of our, the way that our organization works. When we talk about Ben, we never say, he lost his life. We're very clear on it. He was murdered. He was stabbed to death. So I do agree with that. You do need to take a direct approach, but you also need to create a safe space in which young people feel, in some ways, positive that they have, that they are able to make their own decisions that will keep themselves and their friends safe. So in terms of describing incidents of knife attacks in graphic detail, it's shocking, absolutely. I guess you'd have to ask yourself, how would that young person feel by the end of it? And unless they feel empowered, with some facts and some knowledge, then I'd maybe, not take that approach. So that's being very careful about what I say, because I do know exactly what your listener means. I do know you can't shy away from it. Yeah. And then to answer the question from Joe, how young would you say is a good age to start talking about knife crime? I mean, from a very young age, 6, 7, 8 years old, you can start having conversations with young people at an age appropriate level about how to keep themselves safe. Definitely. At the Ben Kinsella Trust, the key ages that we really, really target are those kind of upper primary, lower secondary ages. This is obviously when, children are going through a huge change in their life, change in their peer groups, their location, they're given more independence. They start to get things like mobile phones, access to social media. But most importantly, it's where they are more likely to succumb to peer pressure. So that's why a huge focus of our work is around those peer values and peer relationships. So yeah, I guess, you can start having useful conversations with young people about their own personal safety from a very young age. And we have, age appropriate but very serious and valuable conversations with 9 and 10-year-old children sometimes about knives and about knife crime.
One of our listeners has texted in again through the app, just saying that year 5, well, at least for London, in my experience, the amount of year 7 boys carrying knives is unbelievable, which is scary, isn't it? Really? I mean, when you must do like survey when you go in and say who's carried a knife. I'm guessing the figures are probably quite stark. Or not?
No, they're not. I think for any, as an adult, especially as someone who works in the youth sector as a teacher, of course, to us it would be shocking if a 11, 12-year-old child was carrying a knife. But like I said, it's about perspective. We understand that the vast majority of young people that we work with have never and probably never will carry a knife. And that's the point. Everything that we do is supposed to be preventative. So, yeah, I mean, I've had instances in previous roles where, I've come across a primary age school child, for example, who was carrying a butterfly knife, which is a single blade with 2 handles that kind of fold in on each other.
I know what you mean.
That child had no idea that he was carrying an illegal offensive weapon, for which he could technically have been imprisoned for carrying. And it's a lack of knowledge. It's a lack of awareness. Nobody had ever had that discussion with him. He was just carrying it to do tricks with. It was, a craze, apparently. But unless you start that conversation with the young person, then how will they ever know? How will they ever know that if they choose to carry a knife because they feel it will protect them, that actually it won't? They won't know that unless they're given an opportunity to learn that.
Listen, Tom, we've got through a lot there. I feel like we've got through a hell of a lot in half an hour. But thanks very much for coming on, giving up your time. I know you've had a busy day, so thanks for coming and spending half an hour going through that. I'm sure it'll help a lot of teachers. I had a few texts in there saying thanks very much, and it's
no problem. I'll just finish by saying that, like I said, if you are looking for classroom-based resources, definitely head to kind of benkinsella.org.uk, and we have a whole learning zone on our website with resources for parents, teachers, and for young people. There's a whole range of different Key Stage 2, 3, and 4 lesson plans on there, tackling things like gangs, looking at stories, real life stories of those who've been affected by knife crime. So definitely take a look there, and then also just check out and search for your local services. That they might not necessarily be a knife crime specific charity like us, but there are loads of amazing organizations out there that provide really positive counter narratives around youth violence and around crime.
Yeah, fantastic. Spot on. And thanks very much, Tom, and maybe chat to you again soon. And thanks very much for giving up your time.
You're very welcome.
Thank you,
nice
Tom.
to see you.
Bye.
Take care. Bye.
That was Tom Jewkes, who was from the Ben Kinsella Trust. And what a fantastic interview that was, to hear from 2 people tonight. One who's been directly impacted by knife crime, the other one who works for a national charity doing a lot of really important work for people around this area. So I hope you as a listener have got a lot out of this. If you're listening back to it as a podcast, thank you very much. If you've been watching along on YouTube and on Twitter or LinkedIn, then also thanks. Maybe you're watching it back on one of those, or maybe the link's been shared somewhere else. So if you are watching it back, thank you. If you're listening back, thank you. Teachers Talk Radio is 1 year old on Friday. So it is our 1 year birthday. Somebody messaged me and told me that. I feel like I'm the kind of partner who forgets an anniversary. When I found that out the other day, and someone said, "Hey, our first show was a year ago." So on Friday this week, it will be our birthday. I don't know what we're going to do for our birthday yet. There won't be any secret parties involving booze, that's for sure. It will be a digital party if there is one, but it is something definitely worth celebrating with almost 400,000 downloads. In fact, I think we're about 15,000 downloads away from the 400k mark, which will be pretty staggering to have that many downloads. And that's down to you, our listeners, who have listened to shows over the last year, who've contributed to shows. Obviously, I'll be on in a week's time, but I won't have a chance to say that before then. So it's just a thank you from me to everyone who's listened to a Teachers Talk Radio show in the last year, and I know a lot of people have, and have engaged with us on social media, has supported our hosts, who 90% of which are practicing teachers in schools. And all of our shows are live. It's not an easy stint for our hosts. There is very little of our content that is kind of recorded. It is live, and our hosts are very, very talented individuals who do an amazing job of kind of putting across their message and hosting these shows. And we've had some amazing guests as well who've given up their time on Teachers Talk Radio. So it's been a pleasure tonight, and I will be back, as I say, next week. I'm not sure what day yet, but I'll be back, don't worry. And we'll see you all again very, very soon on TTR.